Globalization. This is for educational use only. Our group is allowing our instructor, Mr. Roldan Ardinis, to use this as an educational material.
People have been exchanging goods and ideas on a global scale for millennia. But in the past few decades, since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the opening up of capital markets, the rise of information technology, and the reduction in trade tariffs, the pace of global connectivity has greatly increased, as many countries and people have entered into a single global economy of exchange. Although the initial phases of economic globalization may be behind us today, soaring flows of cross-border data channeled through the internet are taking globalization to new levels. Today, 1 billion people are coming online every 5 years, as digital platforms are coordinating ever more spheres of economy and society. The level of globalization fostered by the information revolution is altogether unprecedented in human history, as the speed with which information, transactions, and capital can travel virtually anywhere on the planet enables the sustained coordination of human activity at a new scale and level of complexity.
So, what is globalization?
Globalization is a term used to describe how trade and technology have made the world into a more connected and interdependent place. Globalization also captures in its scope and economic and social changes that have come about as a result. Globalization is a process of interaction and integration among people, companies, and governments worldwide. Before diving into the discussion of the history of globalization, let me show you a brief video on the history of globalization.
This lesson looks at earlier forms of globalization, such as the Silk Road and the Columbian Exchange, and examines how these forms of globalization differ to the form which we are experiencing in the modern world. Globalization is not a new concept, although our understanding of it has certainly changed over the years. And while some would argue that the word globalization itself should only really be used to describe the process of the past 30 or 40 years, it seems clear that to a greater or lesser extent, different forms of global interconnectedness have existed since the dawn of human history, or at least since humans started to settle and farm land, thereby creating food surpluses, which in turn led to the creation of specialist craftsmen, bureaucrats and soldiers who were able to look beyond their immediate world and engage with other groups. The first part of this lesson looks at earlier forms of globalization, such as the Silk Road and the Columbian Exchange. It also examines the different globalization chronologies which different globalization theorists have suggested. The second part of the lesson will look more specifically at what distinguishes modern globalization from these earlier forms. One influential globalization theorist, Thomas Friedman, agreed that globalization could be divided into three distinct periods. The first period, 1492 to 1800, focused on the globalization of countries. The second period, 1800 to 2000, on the globalization of companies, and the third period, 2000 to the present, on the globalization of individuals. We'll look at this model shortly as a way into understanding historical forms of globalization. Before doing that, we'll briefly look at what has been described as archaic globalization, that is, globalization which predates Christopher Columbus and his voyage to the Americas.
History of globalization. When did globalization get started? Many scholars believe it began with Columbus' 1492 voyage to the New World. People traveled to nearby and distant locations long before Columbus' voyage, exchanging ideas, products, and customs along the way. Between 50 BCE and 250 CE, the Silk Road was an ancient network of trade routes that crossed China, Central Asia, and Mediterranean, is possibly the best known early example. New technologies, as with future globalizing booms, played an important role in Silk Road trade. Advances in metallurgy resulted in the production of coins. Advances in transportation resulted in the construction of roads, connecting the major empires of the day, and increased agriculture production.
Oh, good day everyone. I am Cadet Edwin Emahito Jr. Today I'm going to present conceptions of globalization. So, what is the conception meaning of globalization? So, globalization is the word used to describe the growing interdependence of the world's economies, cultures, and populations, brought about by cross-border trade in goods, services, technology, and flows of investment, people, and information. So, globalization studies can be categorized on the basis of four research clusters. So number one is the world system approach. So world system theory is a sociological and economic theory proposed in 1974 by sociologist Immanuel Wallerstein in paper called The Rise and Future Demise of the World Capitalist System. So concepts or comparative analysis. World systems theory is a way of categorizing the countries in our world based on their economic power. So countries are categorized as either core, peripheral, and semi-peripheral or external. So before world system theory talk of one of the major theories of economic development was called modernization theory. So this concept postulated that all countries go through roughly the same path for poorer and more primitive economic state, a state in which they can thrive. While modernization theory was popular, it failed to account for the economic relationships between rich and poor countries. In response to modernization theory, sociologists posited something called dependency theory in which poor countries are exploited by rich ones, maintaining a status of wealth throughout the world. World system theory ultimately grew out of and expanded upon dependency theory. And next is number two, the global culture approach. So cultural globalization refers to the rapid movement of ideas, attitudes, meanings, values, and cultural products across the national borders. So it refers especially to the idea that there is now a global and common culture transmitted and reinforced by internet, popular entertainment, transitional marketing of particular brands, and international tourism that transcends local cultural traditions and lifestyles, and that shapes the perceptions, aspirations, tastes, and everyday activities of people wherever they may live in the diverse sport. So the globalization of sport is another really obvious example of cultural globalization. Think of all the international sporting events that take place, most notably the World Cup and the Olympics, which bind millions together in shared truly global leisure experience. So number three is the global society approach. For as long as humans have lived on Earth, it has been shaped like globe. Yes, we have a spur. Furthermore, humans have lived on this global spur and just about every place. This has been true for hundreds of thousands of years. So why are we only now making such views about the global community? So well, despite the fact that international trade is far from something new. So modern technology and transportation have connected people on an unprecedented scale. So you may have heard of the term globalization or the integration of international economies, politics, and culture. Why does globalization matter? Because for the first time in human history, we may actually be facing a true global society or unified social community that encompasses the entire world. So last is the global capitalism approach. So within a capitalist system, private individuals or corporations own the means of production of the land, factories, machinery, natural resources required to manufacture and produce goods. So more importantly, they derive income from such ownership by using their wealth to create more wealth. So the basic driver for these wealth owners is the pursuit of profit under capitalism. So the owners of production compete to produce better goods and earn a greatest share of the market. It is the level of competition driven by the pursuit of growth and profits that helps keep prices from rising too high. So in capitalist corporations, the owners are known as shareholders. They exercise a level of control over the company depending on how many shares they own and receive a share of the profits in return for their investments. So workers, by contrast, sell their labor to the corporations for a wage. This means that the labor is commodity like any other. In the most basic sense, corporations will seek to extract more value from labor than they pay for it. Enabling them to make greater profits. What we see in a capitalist society is a compartmentalized workforce where some workers earn far more than others. That's because some types of labor are understood to have a greater value. So capitalism cannot function on its own. It needs to operate within a culture and political system that will support and legitimize capitalist values and make this particular worldview seem right. In particular, capitalism needs the support of a free market economy where goods are bought and sold according to the laws of supply and demand. By this law, when demand goes up, prices rise. Capitalists will increase production to get a share of these profits. This keeps people employed and ensures that goods are produced according to consumer need. So capitalists also needs the support of a consumer society. The system cannot function unless people are willingly consuming the output of all the production.
So hi, I am Engine Cadet Montalvo. So at this point, I will be talking about the philosophies of the varying definitions of globalization. So first, what is philosophy? Philosophy is the study of the theoretical basis of a particular branch of knowledge or experience. And at this point also, I will be sharing to you few scholars that talks about the globalization. So first is Anthony Giddens. So Anthony Giddens is a English sociologist known for his theory of structuralization and his holistic view of modern societies. So for him, globalization is fundamentally social, cultural, political, and not just economic. Globalization is about macro systematic changes in the global marketplace and the nature of sovereignty. But it is also about the here and now, about transformations that affect our daily and emotional lives. Also, Giddens argued that the driving force behind globalization is the information revolution. Instantaneous communication changes almost everything. It invades the texture of everyday life, but it also provides for the restructuring of other institutions. Giddens said, then the outcome of this revolution is a highly complex set of processes that often take contradictory shapes, but one can simplify the concept of globalization with a threefold image. Globalization pulls away from the nation state, removing control from the national governments in such areas as economic and trade policy. But globalization also pushes down from the state, allocating new resources for local economies, facilitating the emergence of local cultural identities, and strengthening subnational units of governance. Finally, globalization squeezes sideways, creating new cultural, economic, and political regions that cut across national boundaries. And the second point of Giddens is he claimed that the economic globalization and free trade exer- exacerbate inequality. Judging by naked statistics alone, inequality in the world has grown in recent years. However, if one includes quality of life, measurements such as literacy and health in the definition, global inequality has actually declined. Even in countries where increasing inequality does coincide with the period of globalization, one cannot conclude that open markets are necessarily at fault. And the third point of Giddens is a bit close to his second. Far from being rendered irrelevant, far from being rendered irrelevant, government still has an important role to play in the process of globalization. If anything, it is even more important in today's world. The goal of policymakers, however, is not just a traditional leftist policy of expanding national government. So government's role must be re-articulated, and this is where the third way comes in. Third way politics is really an attempt to argue how you can make left of center values count in a world of fundamental transformation where traditional leftist policies have lost their purchase. The Giddens noted. He said that, and globalization is not sustainable. Why? So that's one of the points that the critics of Giddens was making. So that would be all for the philosophy of Anthony Giddens towards the globalization. Next is Arjun Appadurai. So Arjun Appadurai is an Indian American anthropologist recognized as a major theorist in globalization studies. So for him, globalization refers to the increasing pace and scope of interconnections crisscrossing the globe. So, as we have already established, globalization refers to the increasing pace and scope of the interconnections crisscrossing the globe. Anthropologist Arjun has discussed this in terms of five specific scapes or flows. These are the ethoscapes, technoscapes, ideoscapes, financescapes, and mediascapes. Thinking of globalization in terms of people, things, and ideas that flow across national boundaries is a productive framework for understanding the shifting social landscape in which contemporary people are often embedded in their daily lives. Question about where people migrate, their reasons for migration, the pace at which they travel, the ways their lives change as a result of their travels, and how their origin communities can change all be addressed within this framework. Questions about goods and ideas that travel without the accompaniment of human agents can also be answered using apodized notional scapes. So it's a bit small for Arjun Apodai, but that is all for Arjun Apodai's philosophy towards the globalization. So the third and the next scholar is Joseph E. Stiglitz. So Stiglitz is an American New Keynesian economist, a public policy analyst, and a full professor at Columbia University. So he is also a Nobel Prize winner. So for him, globalization is simply the removal of barriers to free trade and the closer integration of national economies. So the main message, Stiglitz wrote a book about globalization, and it was titled Globalization and its Discontents. So the main message of the book was that the problem was not globalization, but how the process was being managed. Unfortunately, the management didn't change. 15 years later, the new discontents have brought that message home to the advanced economies. So for him, globalization is of course only one part of what is going on. Technological innovation is another part. But all of this openness and disruption were supposed to make us richer, and the advanced countries could have introduced policies to ensure that the gains were widely shared. So that would be all for Stiglitz, Joseph Stiglitz, his philosophy towards globalization. So apart from those famous scholars of the globalization, I am happy to share to you also the two significant scholars that is for me important in this discussion. So first is Leah Velho. So for Velho, globalization may be understood as the direction in which the world considered as a whole is moving. So Velho discusses that the globalization is where our world is moving towards. So it tackles about the future. So next is Anthony McGrew. So for Anthony McGrew, globalization is simply the intensification of global interconnectedness and stresses the multiplicity of linkages it implies. So for him, the globalization is simply a kind of the interconnectedness, so the connectedness of the world around the globe. So like the trade from a country to a country. So that is for Anthony McGrew. And also that would be all for my discussion about the philosophies of the varying definitions of the globalization.
Hello, I am Hanli Galfan, and I will discuss all about agreeing on a working definition of globalization for your course. So globalization is all about interconnectedness of people and business across the world that eventually leads to global cultural, political, and economic integration. It is the ability to move and communicate easily with others all over the world in order to conduct business internationally. It is integration of trade, technology, markets, and monetary systems around the world. Globalization is a central feature of capitalism economics because capitalism must expand to be successful. It must expand globally. So globalization has been with us for centuries, even before the advent of modern capitalism. There were internationally trade networks. Capitalism, technology, and markets have been integrating globally since the 18th century. Most of people agree that globalization rests upon, or simply is, the growth in the international exchange of goods, services, and capital, and the increasing levels of integration that characterize economic activity. In the sense, globalization is only another word for internationalization. The word globalization is relatively new, coined in the late 1970s. The airplane, the telephone, and the internet are just three inventions which are the attribute to the spread of globalization due to the increased demand in the high-tech industry around the world. Business and industry have potential for huge profits working globally. So in today's world, globalization is an important concept for the students in the higher education to understand and appreciate because of the demand in business and industry to hire people who can work with people of other nations and culture, and if need be can travel independently internationally to promote their business or industry. In addition, the world faces global challenges that will take interdisciplinary groups to solve these challenges, providing access to clean water for everyone on this planet, and making clean renewable energy affordable, just to name a few. These global challenges will need to be solved through the gathering and sharing of knowledge across discipline institutions and other institutions on a global scale. Creating a meaningful relationship that work globally is in itself challenging. So what is the most important of defining globalization as a student? The importance of defining globalization as a student to understand in order to determine what worked, to determine that what worked in the past and can be successful again in the future. Our many cultures, ideals, and growing technologies come together to create an extremely global world. So how this globalization affects as a student? This enhances the student's ability to acquire and utilize knowledge. Globalization enhances the ability of learners to access, adapt and apply knowledge, to think independently, to exercise appropriate judgment, and to collaborate with others to make sense of new situations. What is your own definition of globalization? My own definition of globalization is a term used to describe how trade and technology have made the world into a more connected and interdependent place. It is also captures in its scope the economic and social changes that have come about as a result. So what are the benefits of globalizations to people? The benefits of globalizations to people: it allows companies to find lowest cost ways to produce their products. It also increases global competition, which drives prices down and creates a larger variety of choices for customers. Lowered costs help people in both developing and already developed countries live better on less money. That's all.
Lastly, what is the relationship between the globalization and the maritime industry? Let me show you in the following video.
Welcome to a globalized world. Globalization is the process where there is increasing coherence between people and companies in countries which are located far away. In short, there is more and more contact between places all over the earth. One of the most important causes of globalization is the increased speed of transport. 500 years ago, it took months to reach the other side of the world with a sailing ship. Nowadays, a container ship does it in 3 weeks. With a plane, it takes about 12 hours. Containers have been used for transport since the 1960s, greatly reducing loading and unloading times and reducing loading and unloading costs by 95%. Container ships have also become a lot bigger. The largest container ship can hold more than 21,000 containers. So, much more products can be taken per trip. The time, money and effort it takes to cover a certain distance is called the relative distance. The relative distance has therefore fallen. You could also say that there is time-space compression. This means that the relative distance has fallen due to modern transport technology. You can imagine this by drawing a circle around a certain place. Imagine that any place within the circle could be reached within 24 hours. About 200 years ago, the area within the circle was still very small. Compression means that something is made smaller. With time-space compression is meant that the Earth is compressed, figuratively speaking. A much larger area can therefore be reached within 24 hours, which is caused by the improved transport technology. Moreover, information is on the other side of the world via the internet within a second. The communication technology has therefore been greatly improved. Another reason for increased globalization is that countries have agreed to remove obstacles to trade, such as import duties. They do this by consulting through the World Trade Organization, or the WTO. Because companies can trade more easily, we see the same products all over the world. The same stores are found in many shopping centers around the world. The fact that shopping centers around the world increasingly resemble each other is also called homogenization. Because many companies have an American origin, it is also called Americanization. Because different places increasingly become similar and because contact between places all over the world gets easier, it's also referred to as one global village. In response to homogenization, counter-movements have also arisen, in which more attention is paid to regional and national identities. In short, globalization is taking place through faster and cheaper transport options. This changes the world around us.